Welcome to Translation of Light Astrology, where we look at the fascinating ways the symbolism of the sky reflects events on Earth. Trigger warning, this video contains discussion of an accidental death. If you feel any discomfort with this topic, please stop the video. A man who was accidentally decapitated by a city truck while at a Brooklyn crosswalk was a former acting captain for the Genovese crime family. Anthony Conigliaro, 86, was known by a number of dessert-themed nicknames, including Tony Cakes and Tony the Dessert Man. New York Post, June 21st, 2024. This is episode 1, The Mafia Baker. So on the afternoon of June 12th, 2024, at 3:29 p.m. in Fort Hamilton, Brooklyn, a horrible accident occurred. This is the chart of the event. 86-year-old Anthony Tony Cakes Conigliaro crossed Dahlgren Place despite a don't walk sign. Unfortunately, a New York Department of Transportation truck was turning at the same time and hit him, decapitating him. Does the astrological chart show any symbolism of the accident occurring? So according to traditional astrology, we would assign Tony the rising sign, which here is Libra. Libra is ruled by the planet Venus, which is in the 9th house here. Venus rules sugars and sweets, so it's appropriate that she signifies Tony Cakes here. Venus is not in great shape, unfortunately. She's very close to the sun and invisible, unable to see or be seen, and is being weakened by the sun's rays. This is an old Venus about to end its synodic cycle with the sun, sort of like an 86-year-old Venus. Venus is in Gemini, the sign of the twins, and Tony led 2 separate lives, but more gruesomely speaking, his body was literally cut into 2. The Cancer midheaven here shows us the storyline. Cancer is about taking care of people using food. It's ruled by the moon, which is in the 11th house of audience or fans, and in Virgo, the sign of service. People like Tony enough to give him multiple nicknames based on the baking. So where is the truck and where's the driver? So we can take Tony's opponent, the truck, to be the 7th house of Aries and its lord, Mars. Mars is much stronger than Tony's Venus because it is not next to the sun and it is an angular. And Mars is in Taurus, a fixed sign. That means that the truck is powerful and not likely to stop once moving. Think a bulldozer or a plow. So far, things are not looking great for Tony. Mercury in Gemini signifies the driver. Note that it is in domicile, but like Venus, is hidden by the brightness of the sun, which is damaging it. I'm taking this Mercury, to be the driver, and Tony and the driver, they do not see each other literally. It's like they're both standing next to a very, very bright light at that corner, with the light as being the sun. Mercury's in the 8th house of death and losses, and it can't see the ascendant over here in Libra, which is, again, Tony. So there's multiple indications that there's problems seeing here. Mercury is also running the show here. All of the planets in this chart answer to Mercury, and he's the final dispositor. Okay, so where's the mob symbolism here? Well, if we look down at the bottom of the chart here in the 4th house, Pluto can symbolize organized crime, and it's right at the root of this event. It's at the 4th house of origins and endings, and it's in the sign of the mob, Aquarius, the crowd. It's also moving backwards in retrograde, maybe signaling Tony's retreat from that world. So Tony's role when he was in the mob was a loan shark. And if we look, the 2 most powerful planets in this chart are Mars and Pluto because they're angular. They're in tension with each other by a separating square. Pluto in Aquarius can signify the mob in the underground. The 4th is literally the underground. or the underworld, lowest point in the chart. Mars symbolizes violence and, technically sharks too, and it's in the sign of Taurus, which is about money. So this is an amazing depiction of his former role and maybe the tension that he's kind of moving away from that role. And on top of that, the eighth house signifies loans, and it is ruled by Venus, who is Tony. So there's the mob, there's the loan shark. We've got Tony, we've got the driver. Um, so if we look at the truck, I would say that if you look at, there's an even tighter separating square between Mercury and Saturn here. And that might show the driver, Mercury and Gemini, using his arms to drive, being suddenly stopped and braking by the Saturn and Pisces. So Saturn is about stop, a limit, heaviness, and Pisces represents the feet. So it's kind of like there's a tension between going and stopping. We can also note that the sixth house illness is in Aries, which symbolizes the head. And the North Node is there, intensifying and confusing things. So there's a lot of decapitation symbolism in this chart. It's kind of amazing. These are some asteroids. There's several symbols here, and these asteroids are not just anywhere in the chart. They're in prominent positions. So there's Judith 664 with the Sun, Orpheus 3361 with Uranus, and Medusa 149 is with the midheaven. These are all key placements. So Judith 664 is close to the Sun at 22 Gemini, and Judith is known from the Bible for decapitating an enemy general. Here is from the book of Judith. She went up to the bedpost near Holofernes' head and took down his sword that hung there. She came close to his bed, took hold of the hair of his head and said, "Give me strength today, O Lord God of Israel." Then she struck his neck twice with all her might and cut off his head. Notice twice, which is another Gemini symbol, sign of the twins. So here's a kind of gruesome Renaissance picture of Judith. Next up, asteroid Orpheus is at 21 degrees Taurus near Uranus. Orpheus was also decapitated. Uranus is sudden or shocking events. So according to various versions of the myth, Orpheus played a mourning song with his lyre, calling for death so he could be reunited with Eurydice forever. He was killed either by beasts tearing him apart or the Maenads in a frenzied mood. His head remained fully intact and still sang as it floated in the water before washing up on the island of Lesbos. And that, if that's not enough, asteroid Medusa is at 3 degrees Leo, prominent in the 10th house. And Medusa was decapitated by Perseus. So Hesiod in the Shield of Hercules writes, "Being thus armed, he went to the Gorgons, who dwelt near Tartessus on the coast of the ocean, whose heads were covered, like those of serpents, with scales, and who had large tusks like boars, brazen hands, and golden wings. He found them asleep and cut off the head of Medusa, looking at her figure through the mirror, for a look at the monster herself would have changed him into stone." And here's a really, really metal, gruesome depiction of Medusa's decapitated head here. So the Decans. The Decans are 10-degree sections of each zodiac. They're one of the oldest parts of astrology. They originated in Egypt. They're based on symbolism of fixed stars that are rising at different times, and they're also used in tarot. So let's look at the Decans. So the Decan where Venus is, where Tony is called, guess what? An executioner's sword. It's Gemini 3, and Austin Coppock calls it an executioner's sword. So this would be 20 degrees to 30 degrees of Gemini. This decan corresponds with the Ten of Swords card in tarot, which suggests painful endings, deep wounds, betrayal, loss, and crisis. Notice also the figure can't see us, so there's a more kind of blindness symbolism here. T. Susan Chang calls this the Lord of Ruin, and I think this is clearly a ruinous event for Tony. Interestingly, the goddess of this decan traditionally is known as Praxidike, and she's the Greek goddess of vengeance and judicial punishment. She's a form can be a form of Persephone or Dike, the goddess of justice. So praxis means practice application. Dike means justice. So her name is literally just that kind of function. And I'm not saying that this is any kind of a judgmental moral event. It's just interesting that that idea is here as well. Um, the next decan here is called the Hermaphrodite by Austin Coppock. It's Gemini 2, which goes from 10 degrees to 20 degrees Gemini. So even though this doesn't have the gender connotations, Tony led two very different lives. One as a loan shark captain for the Genovese crime family, and then as a kind of kindly old baker. So there's a sense of this kind of duality in his life. And this decan corresponds with the Nine of Swords card in tarot, which suggests anxiety, worry, fear, depression, and nightmares. So Mercury, signifying the truck driver, is here. And if you look in the upper right, you can see the shock, and despair on this driver right after the accident, kind of in shock as what has happened here. And what else can we notice? This figure can't see. They literally can't see. And this, maybe unintentional cruelty. T. Susan Chang calls this decan ruled by the Lord of Cruelty. Okay, we're gonna go. I'm working backwards here in the Gemini decans. Gemini 1 decan, Austin Coppock calls it the Apple of Eden, and it corresponds to the Eight of Swords card in tarot. Negative thoughts, self-imposed restriction, imprisonment, victim mentality. Jupiter's here. I mean, this is Gemini has some pretty kind of heavy decans here and heavy imagery. But again, look, figure is blindfolded. Sight was a problem in this accident. This was clearly a thing. And T. Susan Chang calls this the Lord of Interference. So that also seems relevant. So let's talk about the fixed stars. Even though I've given you all of those specific symbols of decapitation, there's several other symbols of accidents and decapitation in this chart. And these are the fixed stars that are in prominent positions in this chart. So first of all, the main action here between Tony, the Venus, the Sun, and Mercury, the driver, is happening in the constellation Auriga, which is also known as the Charioteer. That goes from 16 to 29 degrees Gemini. Charioteer is the guy that drives, a chariot that has driven by four horses. So it's analogous, it's symbolically resonant with the idea of this truck with four wheels going by. Fixed star Capulus is conjunct Venus. Algol is conjunct Uranus. Baten Kaitos is conjunct Chiron. Scheat is conjunct Neptune, and Facies is conjunct the Lord of Fortune. And I've marked them out here. If you see these orange stars, this is roughly their location in the chart. So let's talk a little bit more about the Charioteer. You can see here the depiction of the guy with the four horses. So Auriga represents Erichthonius, son of Vulcan and king of Athens, who was the first to devise a chariot drawn by four horses, which he used in order to conceal his greatly deformed feet. The goat and kids depicted in the constellation figure commemorate the goat upon whose milk Jupiter was reared, together with her offspring. That's from Vivian Robson's Fixed Stars and Constellations. And interestingly, Jupiter is here. And if you look in the lower right, this is a picture of the actual truck that was in the accident. Okay, great. So Venus is conjunct the fixed star Capulus, which is the hand where Perseus is holding the sword that he's using to decapitate Medusa. That's pretty specific. It's an open cluster of stars in his hand. And you can see Medusa's poor decapitated head here. And again, remember, Venus symbolizes Tony. So next up, we have the darkest star in the sky. So Uranus, again, the planet of surprise, shock, kind of, is tightly conjunct the fixed star Algol. So this indicates a shocking death. So Vivian Robson says Algol causes misfortune, violence, decapitation, hanging, electrocution, and mob violence, which is note the weird resonance there of mob, and this guy was in the mob. Gives a dogged and violent nature that causes death to the native or others. It is the most evil star in the heavens. So this is kind of one of your heavier traditional delineations, but Algol has a pretty long-standing reputation as bringing doom. And you can see it's in the eye. It's the blinking eye of Medusa's decapitated head. So Chiron, the wounded healer, is conjunct the fixed star Baten Kaitos. So this is a topaz yellow star in the body of the whale. You can see the orange star here. This means the whale's belly. It's of the nature of Saturn. It gives compulsory transportation, change, or emigration, misfortune by force or accident, and shipwreck, but also rescue, falls, and blows. So we have another indication of it with transportation and accident. And Neptune is conjunct fixed star Scheat, and both can indicate accidents. Scheat causes extreme misfortune, murder, suicide, and drowning. With Neptune, it is prominent in inventive, occult, or psychic matters, peculiar domestic conditions, many accidents, danger of drowning. So it's right on that Neptune, which is also can be confusion, right? So, this is an elderly man. Maybe there was some confusion contributed to the difficulties in seeing the truck. The fixed star Facies is conjunct a lot of fortune. Facies causes blindness, defective sight, sickness, accidents, and a violent death. And basically, this is the eye of the Sagittarius here. And the interesting thing about this is that Facies is also another nebula. So apparently in the ancient world, if you were sort of testing somebody to see if they could be an archer, you would test their eyesight at night by seeing if they could pick out this cluster in the night sky, which would mean that they had good eyesight, they had sharp eyesight. But also it can indicate, because it's hard to see, it can indicate symbolically blindness here. He spent his life looking over his shoulder, but he forgot to look both ways before crossing the street, one police source said. So kind of a snarky remark here, but interesting, a New York sort of sensibility. So rest in peace, Anthony Conigliaro. If you interested in this reading or in this analysis, I do readings at translationoflife.org. I also have a huge archive of astrological images at x.com/museumaastro. These are some of the works that I cited in this talk. Highly recommend 36 Faces by Austin Coppock. This is looking into those 10-degree divisions of each sign. There's a new version. There will be a revised. This is a notoriously hard to obtain book, but there's going to be a revised version out soon. The Fixed Stars and Constellations in Astrology, Vivian Robson. 36 Secrets by T. Susan Chang looks at the decans, these faces, decans from a tarot perspective. And then also the Biddy, I was looking at Biddy Tarot to get some of these meanings. Thank you so much. I hope you've enjoyed that talk and come back for more analysis in astrology.